My brother seized our father's property. Those words kept echoing through my mind as I stood on the front porch with 2 cardboard boxes at my feet, listening to the deadbolt click from the inside. Dad wanted me to have the house, my brother Jason had said only minutes earlier. You don't belong here anymore. I stared at the blue front door I'd walked through almost every day of my life. My father's favorite rocking chair was still visible through the living room window. His coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. The funeral had ended less than 3 hours earlier and already I was homeless. I remember reaching for the spare key Dad always hid beneath the flower pot, but the flower pot was gone. Jason had thought of everything. He stood behind the curtain watching me without opening the door again. I picked up my boxes, walked to my old Honda parked at the curb and drove away without looking back because I knew if I did, I might never find the strength to leave. Even now, 5 years later, I still wake up some nights hearing that lock turn. It's strange what grief chooses to remember. Not the flowers. Not the funeral. Not even the final goodbye. Just the sound of a door closing. Around 3 o'clock this morning I found myself standing in my apartment kitchen with the refrigerator door open, the pale light spilling across the hardwood floor. A cup of coffee had gone cold beside me. Late-night television flickered quietly from the living room, but I wasn't watching it. My mind kept drifting backward. Back to Saturday mornings when Dad coached my brother's little league baseball team while I sat beside him on the aluminum bleachers keeping score because he said I had the neatest handwriting in the family. Back to summer evenings when we'd repaint the fence together and Dad would always say, "A home isn't walls. It's the people who protect each other inside them." Back to the day Mom passed away. Jason cried in Dad's arms while I quietly made dinner because somebody had to keep the house running. I was always the dependable one. Jason was always the loud one. Dad loved us both. Of that, I never had any doubt. After college I moved back into the house to help Dad when arthritis made climbing stairs difficult. I drove him to doctor's appointments, managed his medications, paid utility bills whenever his pension came up short. Jason visited on birthdays, Christmas, maybe Father's Day, always with excuses. Work, life. Dad never complained. He simply smiled whenever Jason finally showed up. Then came the heart attack. Fast. Unexpected. The hospital hallway still visits me in dreams sometimes. Bright fluorescent lights. Doctors speaking softly. A nurse placing a hand on my shoulder before saying the words I already knew were coming. Everything afterward blurred together. Funeral arrangements. Relatives. Casseroles. Sympathy cards. Then Jason announced he'd found paperwork showing Dad intended for him to take over everything. I was too exhausted to argue. He hired movers. Changed the locks. Told relatives I'd chosen to leave because I wanted a fresh start. Nobody asked me. Perhaps they didn't want the answer. 4 months afterward I rented a tiny apartment outside Indianapolis. 1 bedroom. Thin walls. A noisy refrigerator that rattled every night around 3 in the morning. I worked longer hours than ever. Accounting by day. Freelance bookkeeping at night. Every paycheck became another brick in rebuilding a life I hadn't planned to lose. People kept telling me time heals everything. It doesn't. Time simply teaches you where to place the pain so you can carry it. Eventually I earned a promotion. Then another. Board meetings replaced cubicles. I bought reliable furniture instead of thrift store chairs. I learned to laugh again. Not because life became easier. Because refusing joy would have meant letting Jason steal more than a house. Then one rainy Thursday afternoon an unfamiliar law office called. "Miss Bennett." "Yes. We've recently recovered documents belonging to your late father." Recovered. The word sounded odd. Apparently the attorney who drafted Dad's estate plan had retired. During the transfer of archived files to another firm, they discovered an original sealed will that had never been submitted during probate. My heart stopped. There was another will? Yes. I barely heard the rest. The hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. I told nobody. Not friends. Not coworkers. Certainly not Jason. Every evening I found myself wondering the same thing. Had Dad really left something behind? Or was I hoping for a miracle? The courthouse smelled exactly the way courthouses always seem to smell. Old paper, polished wood, and stale coffee. Jason arrived wearing an expensive gray suit. He smiled when he saw me. Not warmly. Confidently. "You finally decided to stop fighting?" I simply nodded. Inside, the judge reviewed the documents carefully. The attorney explained everything. Dad had revised his estate plan 18 months before his death. The updated will had never reached probate because the attorney handling it suffered a sudden medical emergency shortly afterward, and administrative failures buried the file for years. Then came the sentence. The residence located on Maple Drive shall pass entirely to my daughter, Claire Bennett, in recognition of her years of devoted care and because she has made that house a home. Silence. Absolute silence. Jason blinked once. Then twice. His attorney started flipping frantically through papers that no longer mattered. My brother actually laughed. This has to be some mistake. The judge calmly examined signatures. Witness statements. Notary seals. Everything matched. Everything. Jason's face slowly lost every trace of certainty. I lived there for 5 years, he whispered. The attorney answered gently. You occupied property that legally belonged to your sister. That wasn't even the biggest surprise. Dad had anticipated conflict. Attached to the will was a handwritten letter. If you're reading this, then something went wrong. Claire, thank you for giving up years of your own life so I could stay in my home. Jason, I love you, but love cannot replace fairness. I hope one day you understand the difference. The courtroom fell completely still. I looked toward my brother. Not with triumph. With sadness. His dad had known. He'd seen the cracks forming long before I had. Outside the courthouse, Jason caught up with me. I didn't know. I looked at him quietly. You changed the locks the day of the funeral. I thought. You never asked. His shoulders sagged. For the first time in my life. My older brother looked like a little boy who had realized he'd broken something impossible to repair. Weeks later, he moved out voluntarily. There were no shouting matches. No dramatic confrontations. Just movers carrying boxes through rooms filled with memories. When I unlocked the front door for the first time in 5 years, everything felt both familiar and strangely smaller. Dad's rocking chair still faced the front window. The old oak dining table still carried tiny scratches from family dinners. I rested my hand against the kitchen counter and stood there for a long time without speaking. The house had waited. Not perfectly, but patiently. I spent months repainting walls, replacing worn carpet, fixing leaky faucets, and planting flowers Mom once loved along the front walkway. Neighbors wandered over with cookies and warm smiles. Some admitted they'd always suspected something hadn't been right after Dad died. No one could change the past. Neither could I. One early morning, I stood on the porch with a mug of fresh coffee while sunlight spread across the quiet suburban street. Children laughed somewhere nearby, getting ready for another Little League season. A gentle breeze moved through the maple tree Dad planted the year I was born. I finally understood that the court hadn't really given me my father's house. He'd already given it to me years earlier. Every doctor's appointment. Every shared cup of coffee. Every evening spent talking on the porch. The will simply confirmed what love had decided long before lawyers ever became involved. Jason had spent years believing ownership came from taking. Dad had known the truth. Real ownership comes from showing up. From caring, from staying when it's difficult. As I unlocked the front door and stepped inside my home, I realized the greatest inheritance my father left behind wasn't the property at all. It was the quiet certainty that kindness, patience, and integrity always outlast greed. And this time, no one could ever lock me out again. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that truth and kindness always find their way back, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us share more meaningful stories like this. Thank you sincerely for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next story.